Here are the answers for the section 4-7 homework, starting on page 142. Write an equivalent sentence. When we look at the formation of this equation, we notice on the left side there's a product. The first factor is x, and that is being multiplied to the second factor, x plus 3. This product is equal to 0. That means we can apply the zero product property that we've used in an earlier chapter this year. The technique is to take the first factor and say equals 0. Then write the word or. Take the second factor and say equals to 0. Here is our equivalent sentence. We are not actually going to solve that in the oral questions, but when we get to the written exercises, we will continue on and solve. Next, number 3, we have that same formation. Two factors being multiplied, and the answer is 0. Take the first factor and say equals 0. Write the word or. Take the second factor and say equals 0. Number 9, we do not have that same formation. It doesn't say equals 0. Let's subtract 2a from both sides. We get a squared minus 2a is equal to 0. Now we have the 0 on the right, but on the left side we have a binomial. We don't have factored form. So let's factor this. We can factor out a greatest common factor of a, leaving a minus 2. Now we have the correct formation to apply the zero product property. Our answer is a equals 0 or a minus 2 is equal to 0. In the written exercises, we're going to use that same technique, but continue on and actually solve to find answers for the variable. We want to make sure that on the left side of the equation we have a product. We cannot have a trinomial. Let's factor this trinomial. X minus 3 times x minus 1 makes this positive 3 and the numbers combined to the negative 4. And that is equal to 0. Now we have the correct formation to use the zero product property. X minus 3 equals 0 or x minus 1 equals 0. Solve the first one by adding 3 to both sides. Solve the second one by adding 1 to both sides. So our answer is x equals 3 or x equals 1. In number 3, let's factor our trinomial. We have r times r, and we can go with negative 8 times positive 4. Those multiply to negative 32, and negative 8 plus 4 combines to negative 4. And this is equal to 0. So now that we have the correct formation, we can take each factor and say equals 0. Don't forget the word or in there. Add 8 to solve the first one, and subtract 4 to solve the second one. The answer is r equals 8 or r equals negative 4. Number 5, we need to factor the binomial. X times x minus 9, and that's equal to 0. Take the first factor and say equals 0. Write the word or. Take the second factor and say equals 0. The first one's already solved for x, and this one over here can be solved by adding 9 to both sides. So our answer is x equals 0 or 9. Number 7, let's factor this. This is a perfect square trinomial. So one set of parentheses squared. That's n minus and 3. And this is equal to 0. Remember that if a factor is being squared, it means you have that same factor twice. So we have n minus 3 is equal to 0, or n minus 3 is equal to 0. But there's no reason to write the same thing twice. We're going to get the same result when we solve. Add 3 to both sides, and we find out the answer is n equals 3. Number 9, this binomial is a difference of squares. So it factors with a double parenthesis pattern. X plus 3 times x minus 3. Take the first factor and say equals 0. Write the word or. Take the second factor and say equals 0. And now solve both of these equations. subtract the 3, and over here on this one, add the 3. Here are our two answers for x. Number 11 does not have the correct format, so let's subtract 10y from both sides to get a 0. We would have 0 equals 4y squared minus 10y. We are more used to having the 0 on the right side, so let's switch the sides using the symmetric property. Now let's factor. There is a greatest common factor of 2y. 2y times 2y is 4y squared. 2y times negative 5 is the negative 10y, and this is equal to 0. Now create the two pieces. Our first factor is 2y. Write the word or. The other factor is 2y minus 5. Now solve both of these. Divide both sides by 2, we get y equals 0. Over here, add the 5. Then divide by 2. Our answer is y equals 0 or 5 halves. Number 13. This does not have the correct formation to use the zero product property. Let's subtract the 8z from both sides. We have z squared minus 8z plus the 12 is equal to 0. Now we can use factoring. Z times z is the z squared, and negative 6 times negative 2 is positive 12. And I chose those numbers because they combine to negative 8. Take the z minus 6 and say equals 0. Write the word or, and take the z minus 2 and say equals 0. Now solve both of these. Z equals 6 or z equals 2. Number 15, let's factor the trinomial. 2a times a is the 2a squared. Next, let's think of two numbers that multiply to positive 2. And because the middle is negative, let's use negative numbers. Negative 1 times negative 2 makes positive 2. And I put them in these places so that the outer product and the inner product combine to negative 5a. Take the first factor and say equals 0. Write the word or. Take the second factor and say equals 0. Now solve both of these. Add 1 to both sides. Now divide by 2. On this one over here, add 2 to both sides. So our answer is a equals 1/2 or a equals 2. Number 17 is not in the right form to use the technique. So let's add 2 to both sides to make a 0 on the right. Now factor. There are different ways to make 6r squared. It could be 6r times r, or it could be 3r times 2r. I'm going to try the 3r and the 2r, and if I can't make this work, I'll erase it and try 6r times r. Now we want to make positive 2, and because the middle is positive, let's use positive numbers that times to 2. That's going to be 2 and 1, but it matters where we put the 2 and the 1. I'm going to put the 2 here and the 1 over here. And the reason I did that is so that the outer product and the inner product combine to positive 7. Take your first factor and say equals 0. Write the word or, and take the second factor and say equals to 0. Now solve both of these. Subtract 2 from both sides. We get negative 2. Then divide by 3. We get r equals negative 2 over 3. Now let's solve this one. Subtract 1 from both sides. Then divide by 2. We get r equals negative 1 over 2. Number 19, The left side is factored, but the right side doesn't have a 0. So let's add 3 to both sides to get a 0. We have x minus 2 times x plus 2 plus 3 equals 0. But now on the left side, we don't have the formation we want. We don't have a product of factors. This is a product, but this extra plus 3 makes this a binomial. Let's use FOIL and multiply those two together. X times x is x squared. Negative 2 times positive 2 is negative 4. Now combine like terms. X squared minus 1 equals 0. Now factor. X plus 1 times x minus 1. Take each factor and set it equal to 0. And solve each of them. The first one you get negative 1, and the other one you get positive 1. The main idea is that you want to solve equations by creating a 0 on the right and a product on the left. So do whatever work steps are needed until you have that format. Number 21, we have the 0 on the right, but we don't have a product on the left. Let's factor it. There's a GCF of 5. We get 3t squared plus t minus 2. Now let's factor that trinomial using FOIL. 3t times t is the 3t squared. We need two numbers that multiply to negative 2. They're going to be 2 and 1, but one of them needs to be positive and one of them needs to be negative. Let's put the negative 2 here and the positive 1 here, so that the outer product and the inner product combine to positive 1t. Let's take each factor that has a variable in it and set it equal to 0. So 3t minus 2 equals 0, or t plus 1 equals 0. And solve each of these. Add the 2 to the other side, then divide by 3. For this one, subtract 1 on both sides. Our answer is t equals 2/3 or t equals negative 1. Number 23, we don't have equals 0. So let's take care of that by subtracting the 13. We have 5 minus y squared plus y squared minus 13 equals 0. The right side looks like what we want, but the left side is not a product. It is a trinomial. We want to factor it, but it looks kind of weird. So before we factor, let's multiply out this first term. 5 squared is 25. Doubling the product of this times this, we get negative 10y. And then y squared makes y squared. Following that, we have another y squared, and we have the minus 13. Now let's combine like terms on the left side. Y squared plus y squared is 2y squared. There's also a negative 10y. And 25 combined with minus 13 makes positive 12. And that's equal to 0. Now let's factor this trinomial. It has a GCF of 2. So we can write 2 times y squared minus 5y plus 6 equals 0. Let's keep going and factor the trinomial using FOIL. Y times y is the y squared, and negative 3 times negative 2 is the positive 6. I chose negative 3 and negative 2 because they combine to negative 5. Take each variable factor and set it equal to 0. Write the word or in the middle of them. Now solve both of these. Add the 3, and on the other equation, add the 2. There are the two answers. Number 25, what doesn't look right to use this technique? We need to have a 0 over there. So let's subtract 720. We get 2n squared minus 18n minus 720. And now it's equal to 0. Now what doesn't look right? We want this to be factored. So let's first factor a GCF of 2. 720 divided by 2 is 360. Now let's factor that trinomial using FOIL. N times n is our n squared. We need two numbers that multiply to negative 360. So one of them's positive and one of them's negative. And the two numbers we choose need to combine to negative 9. So we want our two numbers to be 9 apart, to be different by 9 units. 36 times 10 won't work because 36 and 10 are not 9 units apart. We can't use 20 and 18 because those are only 2 units apart. We can't use 12 times 30 to make 360 because those are 18 units apart. But we can use 24 times 15 because 24 and 15 are 9 units apart. Let's use negative 24 and positive 15. Now take each factor that has a variable in it and set it equal to 0. Solve both of these equations. N equals 24 or n equals negative 15. For the review assignment, we're going back to finding greatest common factor and least common multiple. The first expression to us is not in standard form. It doesn't have the variable first and the constant second. So let's factor this to put it in standard form. This is equivalent to negative of x minus 2. You can think of this as negative 1 times x minus 2. This other one also factors as 2 times x minus 2. Let's make our greatest common factor. Do they both have an x minus 2? Yup, so that's our GCF. Now let's do the least common multiple. Least common multiples are always positive, so we can ignore this negative sign. From the first expression, we see that we need to have an x minus 2. From the second expression, we see that we've already written the x minus 2, but we also need a factor of 2. We can leave the answer like this, or use the distributive property to make 2x minus 4. Number 4, let's factor this binomial. This is a difference of squares. It makes y plus 9 times y minus 9. This one factors. You can factor a 2 out the front. Now let's get our greatest common factor. Is there a factor of y plus 9 common to both of them? There is, so put y plus 9 in the greatest common factor. Is there a y minus 9 in both of them? No, there's not. So our greatest common factor is y plus 9. What we're saying is that this divides evenly by y plus 9. And we're saying that this one would divide evenly by y plus 9. Now let's make our least common multiple. From the first expression, we know we have to have y plus 9 and y minus 9. From the other expression, is there any factor we haven't yet included? We haven't yet included the 2. So let's throw it in on the front end. You can leave it like this or multiply this out.